Hello, and welcome to my very delayed feedback to your Google Hangout 1. And my bad, I have to admit, I lost my notes on the first viewing of your Hangout, and I had to wait till spring break to get some time to listen to it again. So I did listen to it twice. So I have a very good understanding how your group did, and but I do apologize for a delay in sending this to you. I hope that since you don't have another Hangout until this coming week that opens tomorrow, I do hope that some of the things that I'm going to share with you are going to be useful. So number one, I just wanted to say that Kennedy facilitated the first one. So kudos for that, because first of all, sometimes it's tough to get the first set out and get the little kinks out of the way. And so Kennedy, thank you for doing that. Nice work on this. You also manipulated the camera well to where I was able to see the people that were talking, so the camera wasn't fixed on you or on one person specifically. You also had a way to sort of move the conversation forward, and perhaps, there were some pauses and a little bit of dead time in between questions, so perhaps assigning those beforehand, who is going to tackle what, is going to be helpful, because I felt you were sort of waiting for another person to start, or there were some pauses in your flow. But I think that generally it was very well run. The only issue I had with your Hangout, it was very difficult to listen to with Dalia's headphones doing something. I'm not sure if it was the headphones or a setup. It definitely wasn't a connection, which I know you had a poor connection in being in Mexico City. But I think it was some interference when you were not speaking. I heard a lot of your notes, made a lot of noise and stuff like that. So it affected the quality of your delivery and affected some quality of some other portions of the Hangout. So if you can diagnose what it was and why it happened, just look through it or scan through those parts where there's a lot of interference. That might help you on the second one. I had hard time in some of the parts with a lot of static noise coming. I believe it came from Dalia, but you can look at it and see or try the mics and maybe tune out a mic when you are not talking or whatever the issue might be. So with that, I'm just going to share some of the points that you discussed and go over your Hangout. So number one, you started talking about a difference between the civil defense and civil protection, and pretty much nailed the discussion to where the civil defense is related to the war effort. Civil protection goes beyond external intentional threats and security. So it goes to unintentional hazards, so all your natural stuff, technological, inadvertent, accidents and things like that. So when you think about Homeland Security dealing with the issue of security and safety, we're thinking about that security component as being intentional, criminal, and that's the security one. Safety being unintentional, inadvertent, maybe inherent in the system, like technological system, or maybe the weather patterns and natural events. So certainly the national defense goes to those security issues specifically, and it goes specifically to security issues that originate outside of a domestic sphere. So I think John, somewhere in a discussion, talked about the Spanish flu and how it was not considered, the epidemics were not considered even under the purview of civil protection or responsibility of the federal government. I'll tell you more. Civil defense in the United States sort of was created, the first council committee on civil defense at the federal level was created by President Woodrow Wilson. And Wilson created that first committee of civil defense in 1916. So right in the smack in the middle of the First World War, when we were engaged for the very first time since we became a nation, for the very first time in an international conflict. So it was very, very critical to the administration that we focus on that war effort. So in order to protect our war effort interest, we had to make sure that if the enemy, for whatever reason, suddenly targeted the United States and incapacitated some of our areas, we had ongoing capability at the local level. Well, how do the feds do that? Well, through that council, their national defense councils were supposed to be created at the state level to mirror that, and then at the local level. And the military, people with military experience, were sent to the localities to support propaganda for the First World War in the United States domestically, and also to do assessments on the ground. So if you had a factory that made munitions, or if you had critical arteries such as roads, access roads and stuff that were delivering for the war effort, then you had to sort of kind of assess at the local level what your capabilities were to be if something happened to those. So if you had a factory that, for example, produced munitions and it hired 2,000 people from the local area, if those people were attacked, how would you house them? Where would you put them to make sure that they are still making those munitions? So it was inherently federal interest involved, local look at capacities for the war effort. And that's how national defense was created. But Wilson, at the same time, in 1918, when the pandemic, the Spanish flu hit, and it hit in the military barracks in Kansas, as a first flare-up in the U.S., and very quickly spread and very quickly was devastating in the United States, because we had those soldiers barracked in the close quarters, as you read, and then they were being shipped overseas. And so, you were spreading the germs, and there was no interest from the federal government to have any kind of federal intervention for the Spanish flu, because it wasn't a security issue. It was health. Health was considered natural occurrence, so civil protection wasn't there yet for that purpose, for the purpose of a hazard. So I want you to think about that, because this is very important, because we, as far as policy, have gone. Sorry, those are my dogs.